Hello and welcome back. In today's video, I'll be discussing how the city of Ammonihah is very similar to our modern social environment, and no one seems to be aware of it. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, I've finished reviewing the Book of Mormon, and if you go to the channel page, you can find my review of each chapter. And now I have time to cover a few additional topics. In this video in particular, I'm going to have to tread lightly because if I'm not careful, things are going to turn political. You'll see what I mean. As a quick review, Alma the Younger was a Book of Mormon prophet who resigned as the chief judge, and then he went from one Nephite city to the next, trying to bring the people back to the faith. In some cities, he was successful, but not in the city of Ammonihah. The people in this city, the narrator tells us, were after the order or after the profession of Nehor. And Nehor, if we go back to Alma chapter 1 verse 3, taught that every priest and teacher ought to become popular, and they ought not to labor with their hands, but they ought to be supported by the people. The followers of Nehor also considered repentance unnecessary because they believed God would save everyone no matter what they did. As a result, the political climate in Ammonihah was very different from other cities where Alma taught, but it was also very similar to our modern world, especially in terms of how the people interacted with each other, and we're going to be discussing several of those parallels. As we discuss Ammonihah, keep in mind that before Alma left, the city had become so divided that it experienced a wave of violence, arson, and murder, and Alma and his companion Amulek were thrown into prison. But they got off easy. Followers of Nehor burned the scriptures and drove followers of Christ from the city, or they drove the men away at least. They murdered the women and children who were unable to flee by burning them alive, and it's one of my least favorite, it's one of the most gruesome scenes in the Book of Mormon. So are we following the same trajectory as Ammonihah? Because if we are, we should probably be worried. So let's have a look. First, both then and in our modern world, there was a small group of people who profited from contention and conflict. Back then, the Nephites were primarily an agrarian society of people who worked the land to put food on the table, but they also needed a way to maintain law and order. So they set up a sort of part-time legal system, or it was intended to be part-time, where if there was a case to be tried, the judges left their fields and came to court to try the case. It describes this in the beginning of Alma chapter 11. Now it was the law of Mosiah that every man who was a judge of the land, or those who were appointed to be judges, should receive wages according to the time which they labored to judge those who were brought before them to be judged. So the more time they spent judging people, the more money they made. And it seems that these judges preferred working in the courtroom to working in the fields. And this role of being a judge married nicely with Nehor's idea of wanting to be supported by the people, rather than laboring with your own hands. But unfortunately, they could only judge cases when there were cases to be judged. And verse 20 describes what happened as a result. Now, it was for the sole purpose to get gain, because they received wages according to their employ. Therefore, they did stir up the people to riotings and all manner of disturbances and wickedness, that they might have more employ, that they might get money according to the suits which were brought before them. Therefore, they did stir up the people against Alma and Amulek. So, basically, the judges fueled disagreements and then stepped in to judge the disturbance that they themselves had caused. This not only got them out of farming, but it made them wealthy and earned them public honor and praise. And as they became more influential, they used their resources to even more effectively stir up trouble. In today's world, it's usually not members of the legal system that are creating trouble. There's so much crime that there's a backlog in the court system. But let me ask you this, and I'm deliberately not naming names here. Can you think of people or organizations who have made money or even made a career of making people upset or of causing contention? If you're going to answer that in the comment section, please be polite. Can you think of anyone who profits from public conflict and violence? I'll give one example. The way we get our news has changed in the last few years. Instead of reporters and journalists being on salary with a newspaper or magazine, they now get paid by the click. And getting paid by the click, they do what a smart person would do. They study what material brings in the most clicks. And research shows that the most profitable articles are the ones that cause outrage. People are most likely to click on, read, and share articles that are so outrageous that they make the reader angry. So although it's not like Ammonihah where judges profit from contention, there are nonetheless individuals and industries who profit by causing anger and disagreement. So that's one similarity that we share with the city of Ammonihah. And if you start paying attention to that, you'll see it everywhere. Some people are better at this than others. In the case of Ammonihah, one of the best at causing contention was a man named Zeezrom, and we're introduced to him in verse 21. Now this Zeezrom began to question Amulek, saying, "Will ye answer me a few questions which I shall ask you?" Now Zeezrom was a man who was expert in the devices of the devil, that he might destroy that which was good. Therefore he said unto Amulek, "Will ye answer the questions which I shall put unto you?" So the stuff that we're going to see Zeezrom doing, it says, are the devices of the devil. So pay attention to what he does, and then maybe try to avoid doing that. Before we review his tactics, though, let's stop for a minute. Although Zeezrom is presented as a villain by the narrator, in the city of Ammonihah, he was a popular guy. People liked to watch him debate, and as we'll see in a minute, they aspired to be like him and tried to copy him. Does this bring anyone to mind? No? Well, ask yourself this. Do you know anyone who has a favorite political expert on TV? Or do you know of anyone, for example, a commentator or a YouTube personality, who's popular because they have a way of absolutely nailing the point that you're trying to make? Where you'll actually take time out of your day to watch videos of them arguing or making a point or verbally destroying an opponent. Some people have made a career of traveling from town to town or from campus to campus, inviting people to debate them. They fill auditoriums with people who want to see how masterfully they can dismantle or poke holes in views of the other side. Can you think of anyone like that? Do you follow or subscribe to anyone like that? That's how the people of Ammonihah felt about Zeezrom. They loved watching him destroy opponents. So now let's look at Zeezrom a little more closely and explore his tactics, and ask yourself if any of these techniques are similar to the ones used by modern personalities. One of the tactics these lawyers used in their debates with Alma and Amulek was to ask tricky questions or to split hairs. Their goal, as Alma 10:16 tells us, was to confuse their opponent, that thereby they might make him cross his words or contradict the words which he should speak. That's also a favorite tactic among these modern debaters and these traveling pundits. They keep poking at their opponent's argument until it begins to unravel, and they contradict themselves. And then the whole auditorium applauds as the opponent stammers and tries to clarify and says, "Well, that's not what I meant." Or the debater will repeat back the person's argument with the meaning slightly twisted, and when the person objects, they'll say, "Well, that's what you said." Another favorite phrase is, "So what you're saying is," and then they'll present some conclusion that the speaker didn't intend, and both sides of the political aisle do this, by the way. Here's how Zeezrom did it in Alma 11. "And Zeezrom said unto him, Thou sayest there is a true and living God. And Amulek said, Yes, there is a true and living God. Now Zeezrom said, Is there more than one God? And he answered, No. Skipping ahead a little, and Zeezrom said again, Who is it that shall come? Is it the Son of God? And he said unto him, Yea. And Zeezrom said again, Shall he save his people in their sins? And Amulek answered and said unto him, I say unto you, he shall not, for it is impossible for him to deny his words. So then Zeezrom turned to his audience and told them how to interpret Amulek's answers. Now Zeezrom said unto the people, See that ye remember these things. For he said, There is but one God, yet he saith that the Son of God shall come. but he shall not save his people, as though he had authority to command God. Amulek responded that that wasn't what he said, and he attempted to clarify. And although the scriptures record his clarification, the people of Ammonihah didn't hear it. In fact, we fast forward to Alma 14, where Alma and Amulek were on trial. It says this, "And the people went forth and witnessed against them, and said that Alma and Amulek had testified that there was but one God, and that he should send his son among the people, but he should not save them. And many such things did the people testify against Alma and Amulek. Now this was done before the chief judge of the land." What they remembered and what they presented in court wasn't what Alma and Amulek actually said, but what Zeezrom told them what they had said. I am so tempted to give recent modern examples of this. And I've got examples from both sides of the political aisle where a talking head took a fragment of what someone said out of context and manufactured a whole narrative around it. If you look for it, you'll see it. But most people don't try to find examples of their own side being wrong. And again, I apologize for being vague, but I don't want to create a political firestorm in the comments. So in the passage we just read, we saw some of Zeezrom's tactics. One of them was splitting hairs. Will God save his people in their sins or from their sins? We find them using isolated statements or sound bites to misrepresent what their opponent had said. We also find them directing the public on what to notice. See that you remember, or how to interpret events. Having crooked public figures is bad, but what makes the situation worse, both then and now, is when the audience admires them and wants to copy their behavior. And this is an important question. Do you engage in the same behavior as the people of Ammonihah? They watched their favorite personalities. In their case, it was lawyers and judges. They watched them verbally dismantling people, and they admired how they did it. And they began to think of themselves as legal experts. They probably fantasized about destroying someone in an argument the way Zeezrom did. Maybe they wanted to be famous, or maybe they thought they'd rather argue and be brilliant instead of plowing the fields all day. One example of the people trying to play lawyer is in Alma 9, when Alma was first speaking to the people of the city, and they just dismissed him out of hand. Why? They acted like lawyers in a courtroom. They said that they couldn't take Alma seriously because he only had one witness. So instead of paying attention to what he said, they just went into lawyer mode and said that they'd have to ignore him unless he had more witnesses. We see modern examples of this too, of dismissing someone's argument because of technicalities. We see it, for example, in the U.S. presidential debates, where instead of trying to understand the point the candidates are trying to make, the audience and the talking heads look for mistakes. If someone misspeaks and says billion where they meant million, well, you can dismiss the whole argument and maybe the whole candidate, just like they attempted to do with Alma for only having one witness. Then Amulek stood up. He told the people that he had seen an angel, and he testified that Alma was a prophet of God. Alma 10:12 tells us that when Amulek said these things, the people were astonished. Not because of what Amulek said about seeing an angel, but because there was more than one witness. They completely ignored his message and focused on these technicalities. Ask yourself, how often do you see that? Or maybe, how often do you do that? In today's world, news anchors and talk show hosts tell their massive audiences what to notice, how to interpret events, what to remember. When commentators evaluate debates, they compare the number of zingers scored by the debaters, or they fact check whether their facts or figures are off. And social media is full of isolated snippets and fragments of conversations, often framed in a way that deliberately distorts or misrepresents what the speaker was trying to say. One final parallel. Several personalities today, like the lawyers and judges in Ammonihah, pretend to be experts on all topics. Zeezrom and Antionah were very good at arguing, but just because someone is good at arguing, or just because they're smart, doesn't mean that they're right, or even that they know what they're talking about. We see this in Alma 11 and 12, when Zeezrom and Antionah, a couple of lawyers, debate with the prophet about gospel doctrine. And you don't have to look far to find scientists, lawyers, physicists, or other highly educated people acting as authorities on all topics, including religion, or talking about why religion is wrong. So how should we react in this kind of environment? Well, how did Alma and Amulek respond to such a divisive political and societal climate? In their case, they taught doctrine. Even though they were in front of a hostile crowd, they didn't get caught up in quibbling or hair-splitting. Alma 11 and 12 include some of the most remarkable doctrinal sermons in all of Scriptures. In Alma 13, Alma discussed the lives of exemplary high priests and encouraged his audience to repent and pattern their behavior after these great men. And in response, many audience members began to repent and search the Scriptures. Although they didn't reach everyone, just like you won't reach everyone, Alma and Amulek reached the people who were genuinely trying to understand things. And maybe that should be our goal as well, to be a positive influence for people who are open to it, and just accept that that won't be everyone. The story in Ammonihah ended in disaster and in rioting and in murder, as we discussed earlier. And we might be tempted to blame Zeezrom as being responsible for the chaos and destruction that eventually happened in Ammonihah, rather than blaming the citizens, and to simply label Zeezrom as a bad person. In fact, he blamed himself for the murders and everything else that happened. But Alma and Amulek saw Zeezrom as a soul worthy of saving. And that's one of the more incredible parts of the story, that Zeezrom was willing to change his mind in front of everyone and side with Alma and Amulek and say that he was wrong. Can you imagine any of today's personalities conceding a single point, much less saying, I was wrong, and going to the other side right in the middle of the debate? In conclusion, it's easy to forget that contention and arguing and making fun of people is of the devil, even if you feel that you're arguing, or that your favorite personality is arguing on behalf of a righteous cause. If we must disagree, and this is often the case, we can hopefully do it without being disagreeable. So ask yourself, are you like the people of Ammonihah? Do you discount what someone is saying because of a misstatement or a mistake? Do you correct people's grammar instead of trying to understand their point? Do you like to watch people argue? Do you like to see people masterfully destroyed by arguments? Do you argue and contend online? If so, then the story of Ammonihah in Alma 9 through 16 may be a cautionary tale written specially for you. I would love to hear your opinion. Let me know what you think, and we will see you next time.